Picture the moment those lights appear in your mirror, not the thought of it, the actual feeling, that instant compression in your chest, the way your foot lifts off the gas before your brain has even finished processing what you're seeing, the automatic hands at 10 and 2, the hazards clicking on. You weren't speeding, or maybe you were slightly. You genuinely can't remember the last few minutes now. But you pull over. You take a breath. You watch in the mirror as the officer steps out. And here's the part nobody talks about. In the next 4 minutes, before you've said more than a dozen words, you are going to make a series of decisions. Not big dramatic decisions, small ones. The kind that happen automatically, in the space between thoughts, before you've had a chance to consider what you're actually deciding. What to say when they ask that first question. Whether to reach for the glove box before being asked. Whether to answer the casual follow-up questions that come after the documents are checked. Whether to say yes to the one thing that changes everything. Most people make these decisions on pure instinct, and that instinct, cooperative, honest, wanting this to go smoothly, is usually the right instinct for life. For this specific situation, it needs a little help. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why that is, why the instincts that work everywhere else need adjustment here. And I keep coming back to the same thing. Nobody explains what's actually happening during a traffic stop, not in school, not when you get your license. You learn the rules of the road. You don't learn the dynamics of the roadside encounter, the legal weight of what you say, the documented patterns that shape how these interactions unfold. So you're left improvising, in real time, under pressure, without a script. This video is the script. Before anything else, I want to be clear about something, because this topic can go sideways fast if the framing is wrong. This is not an anti-police video. The patterns we're about to cover are real, they appear in some encounters, and knowing about them doesn't mean assuming bad faith from every officer you meet. The vast majority of traffic stops are handled professionally by people doing a difficult job. That's the honest reality. What this is, an explanation of documented communication patterns that some drivers encounter, and what understanding them means for how you navigate these situations. Information that should be available to everyone. That isn't until someone explains it. All right, let's go through all 7. Pattern number 1 shows up in the first 30 seconds of almost every stop. Do you know why I stopped you today? The officer already knows why they stopped you. They observed something. They made a decision. The reason exists in their head before they ever reach your window. So why ask? 2 things happening at once. 1, they're reading your response, your demeanor, your level of anxiety, how you handle the unexpected question. 2, if you guess, you've put something on the table. You've made a voluntary statement before being told anything. I think I was going a bit fast. That's a spontaneous admission. Was it that lane change? That's directing attention towards something. I honestly have no idea. What did I do? That sounds innocent, but the follow-up conversation it opens can matter. Innocent people answer this with everything they've got. They want to seem cooperative. They want to seem like someone who has nothing to hide. And so they guess, they offer, they fill in the blank. The answer that's honest and protective at the same time. No, officer, I'm not sure. Not a guess, not a self-indictment, not a suggested violation. Just that. 4 words, and then quiet. Pattern number 2 is the one that catches people who already know about pattern number 1. The stop feels like it's winding down. Documents have been checked. The ticket or warning has been handled. The officer hands everything back, and then doesn't leave, keeps talking, asks where you're headed, comments on the area, seems perfectly pleasant and not in any particular hurry, and you keep talking too, because it would feel genuinely strange not to, because the conversation has a rhythm now, because the worst seemed to be over. Here's what's actually happening in that moment, legally. The purpose of the stop, the reason you were pulled over, has been addressed. The legal basis for that stop has effectively concluded. What comes after is either a new legal situation with its own justification, or a voluntary encounter that you're choosing to participate in. The Supreme Court addressed this directly. Extending a stop beyond its completed purpose without additional justification raises constitutional questions. Most drivers don't know they can simply ask, "Am I free to go, officer?" said politely, genuinely, like someone who has somewhere to be. That question requires a direct answer, either yes, in which case you leave, or no, in which case you've been told you're detained, which is a different situation with different considerations. 4 words. Most people never use them. Pattern number 3. This one comes in more variations than most people expect, which is exactly why it works. The consent request. Direct. Mind if I take a look around? Assumptive. I'm going to check the trunk real quick. Not a question, a statement. Delivered with enough casual certainty that many people just open the trunk because it sounded like something that was already decided. Benefit framing. If everything's clean, this takes 2 minutes and you're on your way. Social framing. You don't have anything to worry about, so this shouldn't be an issue. Every one of these is a different approach to the same request, and each version is designed, deliberately or not, to make declining feel harder than agreeing. The social framing version does something specific. It reframes your right to decline a search as evidence that you're concerned about something. But think about that honestly. The right to decline a search exists for everyone, regardless of what's in the car. It's a constitutional protection that doesn't disappear because you have nothing to worry about. Using it isn't unusual, it's simply informed. The response, regardless of which version you hear: "Officer, I don't consent to searches." 5 words. Calm. Not a discussion starter, not an invitation to rephrase. Just that, said once and left there. And if a search proceeds anyway, "I'm not consenting to this search, but I won't physically resist." Both parts. The first establishes your position for the legal record. The second ensures safety and compliance with lawful authority. These are two separate things. Keep them separate. Pattern number 4, subtler than the first 3, and it catches people who think they're paying attention. The incremental timeline. Not one big question about your evening. 5 small questions, spread across several minutes of a stop that feels like it's winding down. "You work in the area?" A minute passes. Something is being written. "What time did you finish up tonight?" Another pause. "You came straight from there?" Then, "Which way did you come in on?" Each question, alone, sounds completely unremarkable, like someone making conversation. The kind of thing you answer without thinking because there's no obvious reason not to. But assembled together, those answers have built a detailed account of your evening, a timeline, a location sequence, information you provided voluntarily, one small piece at a time, without ever feeling like you were providing it. You're not legally required to answer questions about your activities during a routine traffic stop. Where you've been, where you're going, what your evening looked like, none of that is in the required category. "I'd prefer not to answer questions about my activities," said once, quietly, no extended explanation needed. Pattern number 5 is about what happens when you're made to wait. The stop seems almost over, and then it isn't. A second officer appears. You're asked to step out, which is a legally established request that officers can make during a lawful stop. You're asked to stand at the rear of the vehicle. There's a wait. Nobody explains the wait. Some of this is genuine procedure. Some of it is the stop being extended past its original purpose, with the extension serving specific investigative functions: visual survey, behavioral observation, waiting for additional resources. The legal reality we mentioned, Rodriguez v. United States, is relevant here. A stop can't be extended indefinitely beyond its original purpose without additional justification. You don't argue this on the roadside. That's not the time or place. What you do is ask clearly, when the original business seems completed, "Am I free to go?" If detained, "I'd like to speak with an attorney before answering any further questions." Not confrontational, just clear. Your position established. The legal question preserved for the appropriate setting. Pattern number 6. This one works specifically because it sounds so human. "Look, between us, if you're honest with me right now, I can probably make this a lot easier. I'd rather let you go than have this become something bigger." Or some version of that. The exact words change, the structure doesn't. It creates the impression of a private negotiation between two people who can work something out if the right information changes hands. The framing implies the officer has significant influence over what happens next. That honesty now creates a better outcome later. That this is a moment where being open with the right person is genuinely in your interest. The honest reality. What happens after a traffic stop, charging decisions, prosecutorial choices, how things proceed, is usually far outside the control of the officer you're speaking with. The framing of a deal is compelling because it engages something genuinely decent in people: the impulse toward honesty, the hope that openness leads somewhere good. In this specific context, what it leads to is statements. Statements that exist regardless of what happens with any implied negotiation. The response: "I appreciate that. I'd prefer to speak with an attorney before answering questions." No hostility, no long explanation, just that. Pattern number 7. And this is the one almost nobody thinks about: the post-stop moment. Everything is handled. The stop is finished. You're about to pull back into traffic. And then the officer waves or calls out or walks back toward the car. "Hey, real quick, can I ask you something?" The energy of the stop has already released. Your guard dropped the moment they said you were free to go. This feels like an afterthought, like something minor. But the post-stop moment is legally different from the stop itself. You're not detained. There's no formal proceeding happening. This is a voluntary encounter, meaning you're participating entirely by choice. And because it doesn't feel significant, because the instinct is to just answer a quick question from someone you've been talking to for 5 minutes, people say things here that they were careful about earlier. Once the stop is genuinely concluded, you're free. "I need to get going. Have a good evening." And then you go. Not rude, not a statement, just someone who has somewhere to be. Here's the complete toolkit. Say these out loud right now. Genuinely, do it. Because the version of you who needs them to come out without hesitation. No, officer, I'm not sure. First question. My registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for it now. Moving toward documents. Officer, I don't consent to searches. Any consent request, any framing. I'm not consenting to this search, but I won't physically resist if a search proceeds. I'd prefer not to answer questions about my activities, incremental questions about your evening. Am I free to go, officer? When the stop seems extended past its purpose. I'd like to speak with an attorney before answering questions, if detained, or if pattern 6 appears. I need to get going. Have a good evening. Post-stop moment. 8 phrases. That's genuinely it. Not a law degree, not perfect knowledge of constitutional history, just 8 phrases, practiced until they're automatic. A few quick scenarios. Because recognizing these patterns in real time is different from reading about them. What if you're the passenger, not the driver? You're legally part of the stop. Depending on your state, and stop and identify laws vary significantly across jurisdictions, so knowing your state's specific rules matters. You may need to provide your name. You can be asked to step out. Same approach as the driver, hands visible. Don't volunteer information. Don't narrate the situation on behalf of the driver. I'd prefer not to answer questions without an attorney present. Covers any substantive question. What if pattern 3 arrives after a long, friendly conversation where you're completely relaxed? That's actually the most common version. The rapport was built over several minutes. Things felt easy. And then the request comes in the same casual tone as everything else that preceded it. The phrase doesn't change based on context. Officer, I don't consent to searches. The setup doesn't modify the response. What if it's late at night and the area feels genuinely isolated? Hazards on immediately. Slow down visibly. Drive at clearly reduced speed toward the nearest well-lit, populated area. Call 911 while moving. I've been pulled over and I'm driving toward a lit area for safety before stopping. A legitimate officer will understand this completely. The key is communicating the intention, not just driving without explanation. Here's what I actually want this to do for you. Not make you afraid of traffic stops. Not make you treat every officer as an adversary. Not add a layer of anxiety to something that's usually unremarkable. I want you to stop improvising. Because right now, most drivers improvise these encounters entirely on instinct. And instinct is built for social situations, not for navigating the legal weight of what gets said on the side of a road at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. These 8 phrases replace improvisation with preparation. They're calm, they're lawful, they're respectful, they create zero conflict, and they protect things that instinct in these moments sometimes gives away without meaning to. That's all this is. But here's the thing I keep thinking about after putting this list together. 7 patterns during the stop itself. What about everything that happens when there's no stop at all? When an officer approaches you on foot in a parking lot or on a street corner, and the whole dynamic is different. No car, no documents, no formal procedure. Just a person asking questions that feel completely informal. The patterns in those encounters are different, more conversational, lower apparent stakes. And that lower stakes feeling is exactly what makes them worth understanding. Because the things people say when they think nothing significant is happening, those become significant too.